All right, so I have my fin panels epoxied together. This is all cured and yeah, ready to go with sanding. So the first thing I'm going to do is rough sand this. So I'm going to just kind of focus on getting the taper and the shape of the foil on both sides, and I'll do that with some, I think I have 50 grit sandpaper here, so I'm just going to be taking off material and trying to get this roughly into the shape of a fin as quickly as I can, and then I'll stop and switch to a finer grit and perfect that a little bit more and hone that shape even more. And I'm going to, for this part, I'm going to put on a mask. A lot of this styrene gets into the air as you're working here, so I don't want to be breathing that in. And actually, my daughter asked me she watched this and gave me some pointers, one of which is to make better eye contact, which I'm trying to do now with the camera. And also she mentioned, if you are a kid and you're doing this, just make sure you have parental supervision, or make sure a parent knows what you're doing and is helping you with the parts of this that are a little bit more dangerous. Yeah, so be careful. So as I'm doing this, I am working on the leading edge here, and I'm just making sure not to sand past the center line that I marked. That's the center of the blade. And I'm starting to see the first line that was scored into the foam. I'm starting to see that disappear. It's still not totally gone, which is fine. It might not be gone by the time I switch to the finer sandpaper, but I'm starting to get that rounded taper and foil of the leading edge, and now I'm going to switch over and work on the trailing edge a little bit. So here I'm just checking to see I can still see this line here. The line has sort of disappeared, so I know I'm kind of where I need to be here, but there's still some sanding that has to be done toward the bottom part of the fin. So I just wanted to show what that looks like when part of the fin is foiled properly through this area and part isn't. So I'm going to keep working here. All right, so at this point, I think this is the rough sanding, the rough pass at foiling is complete. It's tapering. The foam is now tapering towards the leading edge in sort of a rounded shape. I can still see some of that scored line that's a guide a little bit there. And so it's tapering towards the front edge in roughly the right shape, and then also toward the trailing edge it's now tapering. I haven't really worked on the thickness of the trailing edge at all. I'll get to that with the next grade of sandpaper. A little concerned about the really coarse sandpaper tearing that edge up, but there's barely there's maybe a little bit, a millimeter or so of a ledge between the two pieces of foam, but not much. So it's tapering nicely towards that trailing edge, and it's also tapering in a third direction out toward the tip of the fin as well. So it's sort of tapering away toward the front, toward the back, and then also out towards the tip, and it's doing that on both sides. So it's still rough. I can tell it's not totally symmetrical, but we'll fix that with the next grade of sandpaper. I'm going to clean up a little bit. One thing that I do is I save some of these shavings, some of what I'm sanding off. If I do nick the board or the fin in any way, you can combine some of these shavings with a little bit of epoxy and repair your foam. You can see that when I was sanding, that tip just broke off. This gets a little fragile here at the end. That happens to me almost every time I do this. I'm hoping to get to the point where that doesn't happen, but it's not a big deal. I just, added a little mixed up a little epoxy and glued it back together. I used 5-minute epoxy, so it should set up really fast. And it's not going to affect the strength because this is all going to get covered with fiberglass anyway. But yeah, if that happens, just take a deep breath, mix up some epoxy and glue it back together. I'm also at this point just going to do a check with the foil checker. I cut this out just the same way that I cut out the fins. Just put the paper template on top, scored it and snapped it and cut it out, and I just marked which is for the bottom part of the fin and which side is for the top part of the fin. And the way that you use this is you just kind of align it with the bottom part goes about 3.5 inches or so up off of the base, and you can just hold it there, make sure you're level, and you can kind of see how the shaping is coming along. Once you blend together the foam layers and blend out both the line that was traced onto the surface of the foam and the line that was scored in, you can use this to fine tune a little bit more. And what I'm seeing right now is this looks pretty good. There's a little bit of space that I can see at the trailing edge and leading edge of the fin. So I'm getting a little bit of light that I can see up here and then back here, which means I probably just have to remove a little bit more material in the fat part of the fin, just sand that down somewhat. That one actually looks, this side actually looks better. I don't think I have to really do any more major work on this side, but the other side is a little bit too fat through the middle. I can see that using this tool. And then you can do the same thing up at the top. Place the back edge on the very tip of the fin, and then just hold it level, and you can check the top of the fin too. And then by checking those two locations, the top and sort of in the middle area here, if you're feeling it and it's smooth, you know, between those two areas, you've got the foil right. You can sort of eyeball it and see if you have any bumps or anything, but it should be pretty smooth, a smooth transition between those two locations, and that would mean that you're in pretty good shape. So this looks pretty good. So does this side. I think there's just, I do have to thin out. I have to wait a little bit for this epoxy to cure, but I have to make the fin thinner through here, through the tip, because I was focusing so much on the trailing edge and leading edge. This is sort of the last part that I focus on, which is this tip, which can get pretty delicate. So once that cures, I'll come back and thin that out a little bit more. I'd also, my trailing edge, I can see still the line that I made with Sharpie on there, so I know I'm both sides are tapering toward the middle, which is really good. If you hold it this way, that you can see that both sides are tapering in toward the center, which is good as well. The spots where this can sometimes break or chip on you, what happened to me here at the tip, that can happen. For some reason, also right in through here, it can chip a little bit. It helps to apply the epoxy to the edge of the blade, which I did before I started. And then back here, because you have to kind of, everywhere else you can kind of work along the long part of the fin. Back here, in order to get right up against the edge, you kind of have to go in this direction, and so you can run into problems nicking or breaking it here. So right back here, right in here, and on the tip, you have to be careful. But if it breaks, you can repair it just the way I did. Even if you break it back here, you can still fix it. It's not too much of a problem. I think this is almost there. You know, in addition to using the foil checker, you can kind of turn it this way and look down the leading edge and the trailing edge and just get a sense for if it's nice and thin here and if it's even. Just a matter of kind of reading it that way. But this is pretty close. I'll come back once this dries, work on the tip a little bit more, and thin out. Right now I'm going to thin out this one side that I feel like is a little fat, and then it's pretty much there. Now that my fin is all shaped, the other thing that needs to happen is to take the base, which is too thick. This base is at about 15 millimeters, and we need to sand that down to about half that. I like to go to about 7 millimeters, and then by the time you add the final fiberglass to the entire fin, that will make it the right width to go into a fin box. So I have this tool that I made, which is just 2 pieces of wood that I hot glued together, and it just glides along the base, and the depth of the area that has the sandpaper is about 1 inch, which is what you want. So it will sand down. You'll see how this works. It'll sand down basically the part that is the base that goes in the fin box. And I'm shooting for, if it's 15 millimeters, I want to get down to about 7 or 8. So I'll do probably 4 millimeters on one side and then flip it over and do 4 on the other. So I'll work on one side, get it down to 11, and then flip it over and then get it down to 7. So my base is sanded down to the right thickness, and the shaping of all this entire fin looks good. I'm now going to do just a overall coat of epoxy, just a thin coating on all of this foam, which will actually make the foam a lot stronger. So you don't have to be as gentle once you get a coat of epoxy all over this entire fin. And it also allows you to paint the fin. You can't really paint on the foam. The spray paint or whatever kind of paint you're going to use doesn't work so well. You might be able to brush paint it, but to get the effect that I want, I can't paint directly on the foam. So if you don't care how your fin looks and you just want a functional fin, you can skip this step, the layer of epoxy here and the spray painting that I'm going to do next. All right, my sanding is done. I have a thin layer of epoxy all over the entire fin, and I've sanded that a little bit more to refine the shape. It's a little bit easier to sand. The foam, when it has epoxy, the epoxy seeps into the foam a little bit, so it's just a little bit easier to sand and see the overall shape compared to when it's raw foam. I think you'll notice that if you take that step. So now I'm just going to start painting this. I'm going to do a sort of similar, I'm going to do a blend effect, sort of a gradient. So I'll just sort of paint that and show you how I get that effect. And I'll layer it. I'll do a couple layers. The paint that I'm using is just paint that you can get at a hardware store. And I'll do a couple coats because after you spray the color, you need to rough it up in order to do the final coating of fiberglass and epoxy, and you can't have like a glossy finish to the paint. You have to rough it up. So if you don't do a couple coats, when you go to rough up the paint, you'll just go right through to the black and it screws up the color. So luckily this dries pretty quickly. It takes like 10 minutes, so you can do the coats really quickly. So yeah, I'll just do that and show you how it works.